Okay, so thanks for providing me the opportunity to speak to the user group. I'm an assistant conservation biologist with the Nature Conservancy of Canada. For those who aren't familiar with NCC, we're the largest land conservation organization in Canada, nonprofit, and in Manitoba alone we conserve and manage over 63,000 acres. In terms of our conservation planning, it really starts at an eco-regional blueprint scale, but most of the monitoring that goes on at NCC will happen at either a natural area or property level scale. When we say natural area, we're referring to sort of a broad landscape level monitoring. Think kind of at the watershed level or even a bit bigger than that. And then of course we also monitor at the property level scale, which is a little more typical, I think, of most land trusts, where we are monitoring smaller scale things on individual properties that we manage. So to give you an idea, just a bit better of a scale, what a natural area is. This is a map of southern Manitoba, the province that I work in, and here we work in 9 different natural areas highlighted in red. Again, the size is typically a watershed or even a number of watersheds combined together. So one of the bigger natural areas here may be about 100 kilometers, maybe by 100 kilometers. NCC Manitoba has used Miradi with quite a bit of success in conservation planning. We've developed 9 different natural area conservation plans in Miradi, and we find it's particularly useful in the development stage of conservation planning, especially for things like consulting and the initial stages of development. In terms of monitoring, we found it's quite useful in terms of really trying to figure out what exactly it is we want to monitor. So highlighting biodiversity targets, as well as the KIAs, or key ecological attributes that we use to monitor those targets. And again, that goes further into both indicators and indicator thresholds, measurements and goals. And then obviously Miradi does an excellent job of rolling up all those monitoring activities or indicators to give an overall idea of what the viability of targets are. Here's an example of one of 9 natural area projects in Miradi, the West Souris Mixed Grass Prairie. I've hidden the arrows or the linkages just because that adds a bit of clutter, but we've had, as I said, great success in incorporating targets, threats, strategies, contributing factors, goals, a lot of the features of Miradi. Now, one of the areas where we haven't been using the full feature set of Miradi is in both the work plan and monitoring plan areas of Miradi, and there are a few reasons for that. The first of which was that, again, we do have a regional or province-wide monitoring plan that incorporates 9 large, kind of broad-scale natural areas, and therefore we actually have 9 different Miradi projects. Some of these projects have shared biodiversity targets, and some of the KIAs are actually measured, or the indicators are measured together. So there are linkages between them. However, we haven't found a good way to kind of use Miradi to link those all together. Another one of the challenges we faced was the fact that we're doing both broad scale natural area planning, monitoring, as well as property level monitoring. And again, we haven't found Miradi to be an appropriate tool for us to do that. Finally, just in terms of data manipulation in Miradi, we found it sometimes a bit difficult to edit some of the monitoring aspects of Miradi, including things like indicators or monitoring resources like people or money or time. So that being said, NCC Manitoba has its own regional monitoring plan that incorporates a number of management tools, one of which is Miradi. You can see on the left, we actually have 9, in terms of monitoring effort in our region here, we have 9 of these broad scale natural areas that we typically do landscape scale monitoring on. And then we've got over 200 properties that we own and manage that we do property scale monitoring on. Now, the tools that we use to kind of get all of this monitoring effort and store the data and further plan, we use three kind of main tools. One is a geographic information system, and that is typically done for or used for property scale monitoring. Furthermore, we use an Excel database to store mostly natural area scale monitoring information, but also for property scale. And then finally, we've got what we call a land information system, or LIS. And this is a database that was created by NCC. And the main purpose in terms of monitoring that we use that for is really as a repository for monitoring documents, as well as keeping track of monitoring visits to all of our different properties or natural areas. Now, each of these three tools does kind of feed into Miradi, and I'll go into that a bit more right away. I just want to quickly go over these three tools that we are using very briefly. So in terms of a geographic information system, this again is typically for the property level monitoring. And here on this map, you can see one of the properties that we own and manage. And highlighted, these polygons are one yellow grassland condition assessment and then a number of wetland condition assessments. If you were to open up the attribute table for this GIS, you would see that we've got nearly 400 condition assessments. These are just wetlands that we've done across the entire province, across these 9 natural areas and on over 200 properties. And when it comes to kind of spatially sensitive data, this is usually where we like to store most of our monitoring information is in a GIS like this. Having this data organized spatially really allows us to do a number of things. First of all, it allows us to promote efficiencies in terms of field work. So prioritizing visits to certain areas of the province for different types of monitoring. And it also allows us to conduct gap analyses in terms of figuring out maybe what areas still need to be assessed or monitored, or those monitoring activities that are maybe up for renewal. And it allows us to figure out essentially where we have to visit next. Another one of the tools that we use is the Excel database that I had previously talked about. And this actually includes quite a bit of the same information that you'd find in Miradi. So things like KIAs, indicators, measurements, as well as the sort of who, what, when, where in terms of monitoring. There's a number of reasons that we decided to use Excel as opposed to Miradi. The first of which was just ease of development. When we first started developing the monitoring program in Manitoba here, there was a lot of people involved, and there was a lot of edits and back and forthing going on, and Miradi really wasn't very kind of a user-friendly place to do that. So it was developed here in Excel. Now, furthermore, this includes all 9 of our natural areas. So it allows us to do some pretty useful things in terms of planning across the entire region, across 9 different natural areas. So for example, here, this is in the same Excel database. It's a roll-up of the entire budget for all of our natural areas. And here you can see across the top, color-coded are our natural areas, and then down the left side are different categories of monitoring activities. And this really allows us to pinpoint where we're sort of spending our monitoring budget, and it helps us manage that budget across all natural areas. It aids in things like work planning, finding efficiencies, and even targeted fundraising in terms of finding funding for very specific activities like species of risk, invasive species, etc. The third tool that we use is the land information system, which is that sort of repository of mainly of monitoring documents. And so here you can see at the top, we've got a number of documents that you'd find. This page I've printed out here is just from one of the properties that we manage. So you'll see at the top, there are a number of documents, JPEGs, PDFs, etc. And those can all be accessed. And then you can see below that all the different monitoring records. So every time we visited a property to monitor it. And then below that, things like agreements, as well as the parcels that make up that property. So we do use all 3 of these tools, and they are unique, but they do all work together. And most of the time they will feed back to Miradi in some way. So for example here, I've pulled the attribute table on the left of that GIS for condition assessments, and that will include maybe hundreds of 400 wetland condition assessments, for example, or whatnot. And from that, we can pull all of the assessments from a single location, a single natural area, and we can really see what's happening just on that part of the landscape. So in the center here, we've pulled out 100 assessments from the tallgrass prairie natural area, and we can get a good idea of what, in this case, the grasslands look like in that natural area. From that data, we can then push that back into Miradi and use that to represent an indicator of grassland health, which in this case is the proportion of grasslands assessed as good or very good. And that's something that we could hypothetically update annually as we pull this information out of the GIS. This is just looking again, as I said, everything, we use 3 main tools, but everything usually comes back to Miradi in the end. So you can see here, this is the viability of one of the targets in one of our natural areas, and you can see that we do bring everything back into Miradi in terms of all of our monitoring, as well as our measurements and future goals that would be stored here in Miradi.
So Jordan, just you have about a minute or 2 left?
Yep, I think this is my last slide.
Great.
In terms of monitoring adaptation, we adapt our monitoring plan at kind of 2 scales, which are the 2 scales that we do monitor at. So at the property level, plans for every property are going to be updated every 5 or so years, and that's going to be based on results that we've found monitoring the past 5 years. The natural area or broad scale plans, those will typically be assessed annually. We'll look at the progress of the plan, and that'll be when critical staff come together, and we'll update Miradi at that time. Furthermore, the actual plan itself will have a major adaptation every 5 to 10 years when we will sort of rewrite the whole plan itself. And that's kind of the overview of how NCC